This is the Unit 3 review on trig functions graphing. Okay, here we go. This is what the test is going to look like. It's going to be a graph, and then you're going to have to put down the stuff on the right-hand side based on what you know about the equation. All right, so the first thing we have our steps. Actually, I'm going to write these steps out right up here. Step number 1 is to find the period and its intervals. Step 2 is the horizontal shift. Step 3, find the first point. And step 4, use the amplitude to graph the rest of the function. Those are the 4 steps we're going to take each time that we do this. So here we go. So here we have cosine. That has a period of 2 pi. Since x is not being multiplied or divided, that means our period is still going to be 2 pi. So we're going to put that right there. So I'm going to put 2 pi over here. My intervals will be pi, pi over 2, and 3 pi over 2. Okay. Step 2 is the horizontal shift. Since I'm going to the right by pi, which is 2 intervals, so I'm going to add 2 more intervals to my graph. So this is going to be 5 pi over 2 and 3 pi. We got that because the first one is 1 pi over 2. This is 2 pi over 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. As we go through, we just reduce the fractions. I'm going to erase those numbers now. So we have our horizontal shift done. Now we do our first point. So 5 times 1, because cosine starts at 1, is 5. So I start up at 5 at pi and use the amplitude to graph the rest of it. So I'm going to go down by 5, and down by 5 more, up by 5, and then up by 5. That will be my graph. All right. Now for the stuff over here. My amplitude is 5. My period is 2 pi. My horizontal shift is by pi to the right. My vertical shift, I have none. Okay, so you're going to have to do that on the test as well. Question number 2. In this case, my x is being divided by 4, so I'm going to have x over 4 is equal to 2 pi. I'm going to multiply both sides by 4, and x will equal 8 pi. So it's my period, so I have 8 pi. Half of that is 4, half of that is 2. 3 times 2 is 6. Next is my horizontal shift. Nothing is being added or subtracted inside the parentheses, so there is no horizontal shift. So I can skip step 2. Step 3, find the first point. So 3 times sine, which is 0, plus 2, gives me 2. My first point is going to be here at positive 2. And use the amplitude to find the rest. My amplitude is 3, so I'm going to go up by 3. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go down by 3. Down by 3 more, and then up by 3, and then there's my graph. There you go. Over here, my amplitude is 3. My period is now 8 pi. I didn't have a horizontal shift. My vertical shift was the plus 2 on the end. I'm going to go up by 2. All right. Next, tangent. So this time I'm still following the same 4 steps as before. My period is going to be changing because I'm multiplying the x by 2. So I have 2x equals, this time it's just pi because tangent has a period of pi. Divide both sides by 2, and x will equal pi over 2. Now I got to take pi over 2, and since tangent is divided in half by the y-axis, I'm going to put pi over 4 here, and negative pi over 4 on the other side, which gives me negative pi over 8 and positive pi over 8. Tangent is split up halfway on one side of the y-axis and half on the other. So my asymptotes will be here on the front end and the back end of my graph. Okay, there is no horizontal shift, so I can skip that step. Next, the first point, tangent starts at 0. Minus 2 gives you negative 2. So I'm going to start here at negative 2. Tangent goes up to the right, down to the left, because the amplitude is still 1. My graph will look like this. Now on this side, my amplitude in front of tangent is 1. The period is pi over 2. The horizontal shift is none. And the vertical shift, I went down by 2. All right. Next, cotangent. Cotangent, much like tangent, has a period of pi. This time, x is not being multiplied or divided by any term, so that means our period is still going to be pi. Unlike tangent, the y-axis does not split our period into two pieces. It's just pi long from starting at 0. So we have pi over 2, pi over 4. 3 times pi over 4 is 3 pi over 4. Step 2 would be do the horizontal shift. Since I'm adding pi over 2 inside the parentheses, I'm going to go to the left by pi over 2, which would be 2 intervals going to the left. So this is going to be negative pi over 4 and negative pi over 2. All right. So now that means my asymptote will be at the front end over here on the left, and then at positive pi over 2 on the right. All right, cotangent still starts at 0. I didn't have to do anything else to it because there's no vertical shifts. It's going to go up to the left and down to the right, and it will look like this. All right, our information, cotangent amplitude was 1. The period was pi. There is a horizontal shift going to the left by pi over 2, and there was no vertical shift. So put none. Secant. To graph secant, we're going to do cosine instead, and then graph secant on top of cosine. Okay, so step 1 is the period, because I'm multiplying the x term by 4. 4x equals 2 pi. Divide both sides by 4, and x will equal pi over 2. So that is my new period. Pi over 2. Half of pi over 2 is pi over 4. Half of pi over 4 is pi over 8. 3 times pi over 8 is 3 pi over 8. That's my intervals for my graph. Next, my horizontal shift. There is no horizontal shift because nothing is being added or subtracted inside the parentheses. So I can skip step 2. Step 3, the first point. I have 2 times cosine starts at 1, gives me 2. So I have 2 here. Now I use the amplitude to find the rest of the graph. Amplitude is 2, so I go down 2 more, up 2, and up 2 more. Now, because I'm graphing secant and not cosine, this is going to be a dashed line. All right, I'm going to change my color to put my asymptotes in. Those would be where the graph you'd usually cross the x-axis, which is 0.2 and 4, which are not the peaks or the valleys. On the peak or the valley, I'm going to draw my parabola-type shapes. On the peaks, they're going to go up. The valleys, they're going to go down. There's my graph. Oh, sorry. So that's what your graph will look like. Now we have to do the information over here. The amplitude was 2. The period was pi over 2. There we go. The horizontal shift, there was none. And the vertical shift, there was also no vertical shift. All right, cosecant. Cosecant, we're going to graph sine. All right, step 1, the period. Because nothing is being multiplied or divided on the x term, my period's still going to be 2 pi. There's my intervals. Next, step 2 is the horizontal shift. My horizontal shift is signified by the subtracting of pi over 2 inside the parentheses. So I'm going to go to the right by pi over 2, which is 1 interval in the graph. So I'm going to add 5 pi over 2 to the right. All right. Next, my first point, I have negative times sine starts at 0, which is 0. So I'm going to start right there. Now I'm going to use the amplitude to go, this time because the graph is negative, I'm going to go down. I'm going to go up, and down. And my graph's going to be a dashed line because I'm graphing cosecant and not really sine. Change my color for the asymptotes, which are going to be at the first point, the third point, and the fifth point. Now on the peaks and the valleys, I'm going to go either down on the valley or up on the peak. And that's my graph. For the information on the right-hand side, my amplitude is +1. My period is 2 pi. My horizontal shift is to the right by pi/2. There was no vertical shift. Okay, notice the amplitude is always a positive number, despite the fact there's a negative sign in front of the graph, or in the equation, sorry. All right, let's do them all again. Here's a cosine. Okay, so cosine, step 1, find the period. Because nothing is being multiplied or divided on the x, the period will still be 2 pi. Step 2 is the horizontal shift. Because we're adding 3 pi/2 inside the parentheses, that means I'm going to have a horizontal shift. It's going to go to the left by 3 pi/2, which is 3 intervals. So I'm going to have negative pi/2, negative pi, and negative 3 pi/2. All right. First point, I have negative times cosine, which starts at 1. Gives me negative 1. So I'm going to start right here. I'm going to go up 1 more, down 1, and down 1 more. And this will be my graph. All right. My information, my amplitude is +1. My period is 2 pi. My horizontal shift is to the left by 3 pi/2. And I do not have a vertical shift, so I put none. Okay, there's a sine function. Because we're multiplying x by 2, I'm going to have 2x equals 2 pi. Let's change up that x so it doesn't look so weird. There we go. Divide both sides by 2, and x will equal pi, which is my new period. So I'm going to have pi here. Half of that is pi/2. Half of that is pi/4. 3 times pi/4 is 3 pi/4. There is no horizontal shift. Nothing is being added or subtracted inside the parentheses, so I can skip step 2. Step 3, find the first point. I have negative 3 times sine, which starts at 0, which gives me 0. I'm starting right here. Now using the amplitude to graph the rest of it. Amplitude is 3, but it's going to go down first, then up, then down. So here's my graph. That's what it looks like. Okay. My amplitude will be +3. My period will be pi. There was no horizontal shift, and there was no vertical shift. Number 9. We're graphing cosecant, which means we're graphing sine. So I am doing the period. The period does not change because nothing's being multiplied or divided by the x, so the period is still 2 pi. Step 2, horizontal shifts. I'm going to the right by pi, which is 2 intervals. So I'm going to add 5 pi/2 and 3 pi. Step 3, find the first point. 2 times sine, which starts at 0, is 0. So I'm starting here at pi and 0. I'm going to go up by 2, down by 2, down by 2, and up by 2. Now I'm graphing cosecant, so this is going to be a dashed line. My asymptotes will go at the first, the third, and the fifth point. My peaks and valleys become my parabola-type shapes. My amplitude of this graph is 2. The period is 2 pi. Gotta go back to blue. Amplitude was 2, period is 2 pi. The horizontal shift is to the right by pi, and there was no vertical shift. Here goes secant, which is going to be cosine. So we are changing the period because it's being multiplied, or sorry, it's being divided, x is being divided by 2. So we have x over 2 equals 2 pi. Multiply by 2 on each side. There we go. X equals 4 pi. So here's our period, 4 pi. Half of 4 is 2. Half of 2 is 1. 3 times 1 is 3. There is no horizontal shift in this graph because there's nothing being added or subtracted inside the parentheses. So I go to the first point. Cosine starts at 1 plus 3 gives me 4. Here's my first point. So I'm going to go down by 1 because that's my amplitude. Down again, up and up. It's a secant graph, so I'm going to make this a dashed line. Okay. At points 2 and 4, I will have my asymptotes. And the peaks I'll go up. The valleys I'll go down. Just like that. The amplitude was 1. The period is 4 pi. There is no horizontal shift. But the vertical shift was going up by 3. Next tangent. All right, we're back to periods that are just pi long. Since nothing's being multiplied or divided by x, it means this period's still going to be pi. Now, because we are cutting it in half by the the y-axis, it's going to be pi over 2, pi over 4, negative pi over 4, and negative pi over 2. Okay. This time, though, there is a horizontal shift. We're going to the left by pi over 4, which is one interval. So that means this is going to be negative 3 pi over 4. And that is where our asymptote will be. So that means I'm going to move the other asymptote once to the left as well. Tangent starts at 0. Minus 2 is negative 2. So I'm going to start down here at negative 2. Go on up to the right, on down to the left, and there is my graph. Okay, for the information, the amplitude in front of tangent is a 1. The period is still pi. The horizontal shift was to the left by pi over 4, and the vertical shift was down by 2. Cotangent, last graph that we have to draw. All right. Cotangent's period is pi long. This time it's going to change because we're multiplying x by 2. So we have 2x. And next, 2x equals pi. Divided by 2 on both sides. You're going to have x equals pi over 2. So it is not cut in half by the y-axis. So this is going to be pi over 2, pi over 4, pi over 8, and 3 pi over 8. So there is no horizontal shift, so we can make our asymptote at the front end and the back end of our graph. All right. Cotangent starts at 0. There is no vertical shift or horizontal shift, so we just do our 2 points and graph. For the information, your amplitude is 1. Your period is pi over 2. There is no horizontal shift. There is no vertical shift. All right. Now we get some of the problems that are also going to be on the test. This is one of them. You have a graph that you're given. You have 4 choices. 2 of them work, 2 of them do not. All you have to do is go through and figure out what is going on and figure out if the equation that you're given works with the graph that you're given. So the first one we have is negative 2 sine of x. So that's going to start here. It's going to go down by 2, up by 2, up by 2. That one works. This is going to fit, so we can put A as one of the answers. Okay. Let's start again with B. We have negative 2 cosine of x plus pi. So that means we're going to start at negative pi, which is going to be right here. The problem you have there is this is going to be a sine graph at starting at negative pi, not a cosine graph. So that one does not work. Next, we have a cosine graph again, but this time it's going to start at negative pi over 2, which is right here. All right, this does make sense. It goes down 2, up 2, and up 2. So it goes here. That does make sense based on where the graph is beginning. So we're going to put C as our other answer. I'm just going to go through D just because to show you how this works. This graph starts at negative pi, which is right here. It is a sine function, which works, but the problem is it's a negative graph. So based on that equation, the graph should go down 2 first. Oops, down 2 first. It should go down like this first, and then go up. And it doesn't, so that's why that one does not work. Okay, so C works, D does not. So A and C is our answers. Okay, for these graphs and problems, you're asked to find the period and amplitude, or the vertical shift and the horizontal shift, whatever it is for the graph, to figure out what this question or the answer is. All right, so you're given the graphs, got to find the answer. So it's easiest to start here at 0. This is, I'm going to draw a function in here. This looks like it would be a secant function. It should look like this. Okay, that means the period, you can see here, is 2 pi, and the amplitude is 1. So we could take the top and the bottom. It's going to be a total distance of 2. Cut it in half, it's going to be 1. Next. For the amplitude, if we take the total distance, 3 to negative 1 is positive 4. Divide that by 2. You're going to get 2 as your amplitude. So your vertical shift. So if we're starting at 2, let's say this is going to be a cosine graph. Let's get rid of these things. Say this is a cosine graph starting down here. Okay. So it's going to be a negative cosine graph. Has an amplitude of 2. We already have that. So how do we get it to start at negative 1? So negative 2 times 1 would give us negative 2. We have to subtract 1 to get it down to nope, we can't do that. We have to add 1 to give us negative 1 as a starting point. So our vertical shift is going to be going up by 1. This would be our vertical shift. Okay, so negative 2 times 1 plus 1 gives us negative 1. So that's where the starting point is. So our vertical shift was the adding of the 1. Okay. Next, we want to find a period. So let's say our graph starts here. It goes, it's a negative sine function. It ends at 2 pi. Now the amplitude, we go from positive 3 to negative 3. That's a total distance of 6. Divide it in half, you get 3. Here, amplitude, you went from positive 4 to negative 2, a grand total distance of 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now your vertical shift, let's say again we are starting up at the top of our graph on 0, right here. That means we have an amplitude of 3. It's a cosine function, but yet we got up to be 4. So to do that, 3 times cosine starts at 1. Got to get to 4, so we add 1. So our vertical shift would be adding 1, going up by 1. Okay, so that was with the graphs. Now I'm going to do the equations. So the period of this, a period of a tangent function, is pi. Since nothing is being multiplied or divided by the x, that doesn't change. Your vertical shift is the plus 10, so it's going up by 10. Number 20, the vertical shift is the plus 8, so it's going up by 8. The horizontal shift, well, there is none. Nothing is being nothing is being added or subtracted inside the parentheses, so there is no horizontal shift. Next, the amplitude. It says negative 5, but the amplitude is always positive, so it's going to be positive 5. Horizontal shift is on the inside of the function. Since it's plus pi over 2, it's going to go to the left by pi over 2. And last but not least, the period. So here's the sine function. The period of sine is going to be 2 pi, but we're dividing the x term by 3. So x divided by 3 equals 2 pi. Multiply both sides by 3. 6 pi is your period. Your amplitude is 3. That is what the test will basically look like. There's really no surprises here. any questions, please make sure you ask. Good luck.